Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive right into the fascinating automated disassembly line that is your upper gastrointestinal tract. You know, most of the time, we eat without giving a single second thought to where that food actually goes once it leaves our mouth. Today, we're going to change that.
Let's start by asking ourselves to consider the incredibly complex, hidden biological machinery behind a universal daily act, eating. It feels entirely under our control when we pick up a fork and take a bite, right? But the truth is, the very moment that food passes the back of your throat, you hand over the reins to an incredibly sophisticated, highly automated system. So, the crucial point here is that every squeeze, every churn, and every chemical release in your gut is designed to achieve one ultimate goal: supplying your body with water, electrolytes, vitamins, and nutrients. And to pull this off, your alimentary tract is juggling 5 massive operations. It's coordinating the movement of food, the secretion of digestive juices, the absorption of those nutrients, the circulation of blood to carry the nutrients away, and the precise control of all these functions by local, nervous, and hormonal systems. It's a huge operation. Here's our quick roadmap for today. 1. The esophageal journey begins. 2. Stomach motility and churning. 3. The enteric control room. 4. Making acid, the proton pump. And 5. Controlling the acid factory.
All right, let's jump straight into section 1. The esophageal journey begins, from mouth to stomach.
It's really wild how swallowing shifts so rapidly from a conscious, voluntary action into a completely automated biological response. It all kicks off with chewing, which is just a reflex of jaw drop followed by a rebound contraction. Then comes the voluntary stage, where your tongue actively pushes the food upward and backward against the palate. But from that precise millisecond onward, you are no longer the boss. The pharyngeal stage just takes over involuntarily, moving the food through the pharynx. And that immediately triggers the esophageal stage, which is also entirely out of your conscious control.
Now, take a look at how the upper and lower esophageal sphincters act as strict one-way security gates. They're there to ensure that once food enters the esophagus, there's absolutely no turning back. The upper sphincter grants entry from the pharynx, and as the food travels down past the diaphragm, that lower esophageal sphincter opens just long enough to let the bolus drop into the stomach. Then, it rapidly slams shut to protect your delicate esophagus from those harsh stomach acids.
To actually move things along, the esophagus uses forward-propelling peristalsis. Think of it like a wave. You have a contraction right behind the food, paired perfectly with a downstream relaxation ahead of it, literally milking the contents toward the stomach. And this propulsive movement is entirely different from the localized mixing movements, called segmentation, that we see later on in the intestines. Segmentation is really just about sloshing contents back and forth to mix things up, without much forward movement at all.
Moving right along to section 2, stomach motility and churning, the biological mixer. You see, the stomach isn't just a resting pouch. It's a highly dynamic muscle. It actually has its own pacemaker that continuously initiates peristaltic waves toward the antrum. These electrical slow waves fire off rhythmically. As your food just sits there in the body and fundus of the stomach, these waves aggressively churn the solid material, mechanically breaking it down. Most of that chyme is actually forced right back into the body of the stomach for even more mixing. It takes a full 1 to 3 hours of this relentless, heavy-duty churning until tiny amounts of liquid chyme are finally allowed to squeeze through the pylorus and into the duodenum. Next up, section 3, the enteric control room, wiring the gut.
How does the gut know exactly when to work? Well, think of the parasympathetic nervous system as mashing the gas pedal for digestion, while the sympathetic system slams on the brakes. The parasympathetic system connects to the myenteric plexus, which controls the movement and speed of contractions, and the submucosal plexus, which handles secretion and blood flow. When it's activated, it ramps up almost all your gastrointestinal functions. On the flip side, the sympathetic nervous system uses noradrenaline to actively inhibit those plexuses. If you suddenly find yourself in a fight-or-flight situation, that sympathetic activation can literally stop the movement of food through your gut entirely.
Which brings us to section 4, making acid, the proton pump. If we zoom in on the stomach lining, specifically the gastric glands, which make up about 80% of the stomach, we see it's packed with highly specialized workers. Each one secretes a unique chemical. Parietal cells are busy pumping out powerful hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Chief cells secrete pepsinogen, which is an inactive proenzyme. Meanwhile, down in the pyloric glands, G cells are releasing the hormone gastrin, and D cells are secreting somatostatin. Together, they create an incredibly hostile environment that kills ingested bacteria, denatures proteins, and gets lipid and protein digestion started. Now, inside those parietal cells is the real star of the show, an ATP-dependent proton pump. the mighty H+K+ATP pump. It is painstakingly burning energy to swap potassium ions from the stomach lumen for hydrogen ions from inside the cell. It's actively pumping against a massive concentration gradient. This is what floods the stomach with that potent acid, dropping the pH so low that it can activate enzymes like pepsin.
All right, let's wrap things up with Section 5, Controlling the Acid Factory.
Acid production is so absolutely critical that your body actually regulates it in 3 distinct phases. And it's wild because it starts with the cephalic phase. Mediated by the vagus nerve, your brain literally initiates acid secretion just from the smell, taste, or even the thought of food. This happens before a single crumb has even hit your stomach. Then comes the gastric phase, which is triggered by the physical stretching of the stomach walls and the presence of proteins. And finally, the intestinal phase kicks in, sending either stimulatory or inhibitory signals depending on the pH and fat content that's entering the duodenum.
What we have here is an incredible bit of chemical teamwork happening to activate that proton pump. There are 3 major players. First, you have neural control. The vagus nerve directly stimulates the cell using acetylcholine. Second, hormonal control. Gastrin travels right through the bloodstream from the G cells to hit the cell's receptors. And third, local control. Histamine is released from neighboring ECL cells. When these nerves, hormones, and local factors all team up, they drastically amplify the entire acid-making process.
Now, let's make sure we grasp a really vital medical distinction about the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve mediates both direct and indirect pathways, right? But it uses entirely different chemical messengers to get the job done. Acetylcholine drives direct acid secretion by binding straight to the parietal cell. However, to trigger those G cells to release gastrin for indirect secretion, the vagus nerve uses a completely different neurotransmitter. It uses something called gastrin-releasing peptide, or GRP.
Let's test our understanding with a real clinical mystery. Imagine a physiology study where a woman is asked to simply chew a palatable meal and then spit it out without swallowing, a process we call sham feeding. Despite swallowing nothing, her stomach acid output, and specifically her gastrin levels, significantly rise anyway. Why on earth does the stomach produce acid and pump out gastrin when no food actually arrived to stretch the stomach walls?
Well, the answer lies beautifully in what we just discussed. Because of that cephalic phase, her brain was anticipating the food. It sent signals straight down the vagus nerve, which released gastrin-releasing peptide, GRP, directly onto the G cells. It proves the central control room actually anticipates the workload and preheats the chemical ovens before the physical assembly line even touches the food. Pretty amazing, right?
As we wrap up this explainer, it kind of leaves us to wonder. We casually take a bite of food and instantly, this flowless symphony of specific neurotransmitters, precise hormonal releases, and localized electrical pacemakers seamlessly takes over. If our gut operates as this highly automated, brilliantly engineered disassembly line, just how much of our daily physical existence relies entirely on these invisible mechanisms operating completely outside our conscious awareness? It's definitely a fascinating thought to chew on. Thanks for joining me today.